Trong sẽ tại tỏ ý trong này chỉ cái tên trà thia trong phải mở chùa xuân tu thì là sai cho số một sáu sự của nhà Rachel và Luva nhớ rồi nó của cho bé một sai cho cái hai lũ lòn đời tụ cứ lý cho sẽ trên lúc công họ muốn về hồ địa United Hmong Vision do là tế đền nụ là mua nhớ rồi họ UN là United Nation cái hai lũ nhớ rồi nó hai lũ Anh Kỳ xứ nhân nên từ chỉ bao lũ Anh Kỳ có cho nên nhau trên này ba sai đồ này.
It is a distinct honor to be here with all of you today and report on some of the legal issues involving the Hmong people and the processes that we have been engaged in at the United Nations Human Rights Forums. In the video, you heard me refer to the right to self-determination, and it is my view that the Hmong people have that right. But saying the terms and knowing the law are two different things. So I thought I would review with you today the elements of the right to self-determination in international law. The first aspect of self-determination I'm going to discuss with you is what we call front door self-determination, meaning that this is the law as it is understood in international forums. The people with a right to self-determination have 5 aspects. The first one, land. The people in question have a land, and I believe probably everyone in this room could draw for me the historical land of the Hmong people in Laos. Second of all, there has to be a history of governance in that land, and if you review the history of the Hmong people, you will agree with me that the Hmong people basically ran their own country within their traditional territory. The third element of the right to self-determination is that the people who have it have something that distinguishes them from the larger population or a different population in the same area. We call that a cultural distinction. And once again, the Hmong people are culturally distinct from other people in the Lao Republic. So we have the 3 elements, the traditional elements: land, governance, and culture. Since the United Nations Charter, however, there have been 2 other elements added to this test. Both of them are a little bit paternalistic, if I do say so myself, but I think if you think it through, you will understand why these were added. First of all, the people in question have to have the capacity for self-governance. The United Nations didn't want to have a people take over a territory or land with no practice, so to speak, with no ability to actually govern it. So the international community looks at the capacity, and I think if we look around this room, we see a lot of capable Hmong people who could easily govern one territory. And the last element also is relatively self-explanatory in that the United Nations doesn't want to give a people a territory if they don't have the will to have it. So the international community is looking at the Hmong people as to whether or not the Hmong people actually want to have self-determination. And that is where your actions, our actions in the United Nations, go a long way to showing. Now once again, this test, this 5-part test, land, governance, culture, capability, and will, what we call front door self-determination. Now, what we call back door self-determination is also since World War II and the United Nations Charter. If the only way an affected population can save itself from gross and reliably attested human rights violations, then they have the right to govern themselves. This element has only been utilized in several situations. One of them is Nicaragua in 1979. Not in the United Nations system, however, that was in the Organization of American States. But we've made the case in the United Nations that the Hmong people in Laos are suffering gross violations of human rights to the degree that it can be called genocidal. One of the products, so to speak, of the right to self-determination is that when a people have it, the international community is supposed to side with that people. So one of our tasks at the United Nations is to convince the international community that they have a duty to side with the people with the right to self-determination. The right to self-determination is very, very prominently placed in all the international human rights instruments. It's Article 1 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's Article 1 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and it figures prominently in, indeed, the Charter of the United Nations. So the international community as a whole is extremely interested in the right to self-determination, and our job is to overcome the political barriers to the Hmong people being so recognized as having the right to self-determination. Now, in the United Nations Human Rights Forum, we have taken, first of all, the right to self-determination, but we also discuss specific instances that lead to the urgency. For instance, the attacks in the cities, the denial of food and medicine in the Hmong traditional territory, which is an element of the crime of extermination under international law. So we bring up the fact that the Laotian government is carrying out an extermination policy in the Hmong territory. We also bring up the mass killings and the military incursions into Hmong territory, and in fact, the killing of Hmong people outside their own territory as well. Now, the UN has a variety of mechanisms under the Human Rights Council to address violations such as I set out. One of them is the High Commissioner. The Office of the High Commissioner is established by the General Assembly, and the High Commissioner acts independently of the Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council is made up of governments. So there is a little bit of a tug-of-war sometimes between what the governments want to do and what the High Commissioner wants to do. The Human Rights Council as a whole chooses special investigators. We have special investigators for subject matter issues, and we have special investigators for country situations. These investigators are called special rapporteurs or independent experts. And the special rapporteurs and independent experts also act on their own. They're chosen by the Human Rights Council, but in their work they are independent. And we have met, have introduced the Hmong delegates to a number of these special rapporteurs or investigators on issues relevant to their cause. in addition to the Human Rights Council. We want to take the Hmong issue higher. We want to take the Hmong issue ultimately to the General Assembly and the Security Council. So we have established a sort of scenario or an action plan to address the situation of the Hmong people. But we first have to get action at the Human Rights Council. The General Assembly and the Security Council rarely act on situations such as the Hmong situation without a strong message from the Human Rights Council. Now, there have been Hmong delegates at what we call a treaty body. The one that they have gone to is called CERD, the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And this work was very important, but these treaty bodies, or these independent bodies, don't have any teeth. They can make recommendations, but they can't act. So in our action plan, we have focused on the Human Rights Council because the Human Rights Council can act. The Human Rights Council can appoint a special rapporteur. The Human Rights Council can, and their special procedures, could discuss the situation with recommendations, including recommendations to the General Assembly. And at the Human Rights Council, the High Commissioner for Human Rights can also act independently. So we are trying very hard to get action at the Human Rights Council as a whole and with the High Commissioner in particular. Now, the special investigators of the Human Rights Council cover a variety of subjects, practically all of which are important to the Hmong issue. In one of those little clips you saw, I was indicating that. I'm sorry for the quality of the tape, but there's a special procedure for killing, including a special procedure under the Secretary General for genocide. And then there's a process for torture, food, housing, disappearances, the right to freedom of assembly, a whole variety of specific human rights issues. And one of the things that we did in the Human Rights Council is we spoke with some of these special investigators. They're actually called rapporteurs in the French, to get them interested in listening to the situation. There are a number of special representatives and special rapporteurs that are going to be at the upcoming session in September, and it is very important that we follow up with those rapporteurs. We have already addressed the situation with a few of them, and we need to keep at it. Now, I haven't spoken much about the governments, but one of the most important results of our trip in March is that the government of Laos felt compelled to answer me back. This is very, very high. Most of the time, governments just want to ignore what the non-governmental people say and just go their merry way and talk about their own country like it's paradise on earth. But the Laotian government felt compelled to answer me back. You saw one clip, but the government of Laos actually answered me back twice. I, however, got the final word. My rebuttal to the Laotian government is not in any of these clips. It's on the UN website, on the webcam, where I answered the Laotian government back. And I said, basically, the Laotian government may have good relations with other ethnic groups in Laos, but the government's own words and actions relating to the Hmong people speak for themselves, and they can't just come here and give you platitudes about the greatness of the Laotian government. Some governments actually mention the Laotian Hmong dilemma, not very directly, but there's movement. We have only been at the UN for 3 sessions, I believe, 3, maybe 4 sessions, bringing up this issue, and to get governments to begin to talk with you and make statements is considered very good. In fact, the Obama administration last September after Obama's trip to Laos, he promised aid to help with clearing the unexploded ordnance that was left over from the Vietnam War. Of course, the United States should have done that years ago, but President Obama did come forward and did commit the United States to funds for clearing the unexploded ordnance. The representative of the United States went to Laos in December, but was not allowed into the Hmong areas and was basically given a little orchestrated tour. I was very interested in hearing what the Trump administration would say about this situation at the Human Rights Session in March. But the Trump team was silent, did not mention any follow-up whatsoever, and didn't even indicate that the State Department would still provide funds for unexploded ordnance. The Hmong people have a huge agenda. In my view, you have an agenda following up on what we've started at the United Nations, and that means keeping a team together, having a unified front, and supporting actions so that we can actually go forward. When I say a unified front, the international community is extremely leery about giving a people the right to self-determination. It's a huge step. If the international community at the Human Rights Council sees divisions from the Hmong community, that is an automatic, we won't touch the issue. The international community does not want to be working with one group rather than another group. I have seen this phenomena in other situations a few too many times, and I have counseled the people involved, please, at the UN, you must have a unified front. After you win self-determination, you can have votes among your people, and you can politicize, and this one can run, and this one can run, etc. But do not throw away the goal before you get there. This is a very, very important message. And some international issues have resulted in basically chaos because of that situation. There are too many groups. The international community has to see one group with knowledgeable, aware spokespeople from among the group, not me, but from you. as an interim step to self-determination, we have been arguing for a safe haven. In other words, while we're trying to generate the political arena so that we can go forward with the issue of self-determination, we're sort of coming back a little bit and arguing that because of the catastrophic situation of the Hmong people, we want the UN mechanisms to establish a safe haven, a place where the Hmong people are safe and can come into, and where the international community can interact with the Hmong community. So there has to be like a corridor out. This is kind of a new concept in the United Nations, not completely new, but relatively new. And I think with enough push, with a unified Hmong front, and following through with an action plan, we can actually achieve that. One of the items on your plate is working out a strategy. In other words, it's the Hmong community that's going to decide whether we go forward, moving forward on this initiative. And of course, there's also the domestic issues. In other words, you all have congresspeople and senators. They meet in Washington. They come back to the districts. It would be very important domestically, it's not my area of expertise on this issue, but it is important for me to address it to you, so that you know the law of self-determination and you know what's going on in the UN, and then you take it to your congresspeople, whether senator or in the House of Representatives, and you say, we're in a catastrophic situation. We want you, number one, to go to the State Department and ask them what they're doing, and number two, to help us out, getting the United States government to take a leadership role, not only directly with Laos, but also with the international community. If the United States took on Laos on behalf of the Hmong people, we would have action relatively quickly. So, I will leave you with suggesting that you work out an action plan, you see the goals, you need to develop the leadership to deliver it, and the funds to ensure it. And if you so choose, I will be there with you every step of the way. Thank you.
เขาเนี่ยโคปตาลานอยจะตุคือลีชอบมุลเบหัวเตีย Karen Parker จะตุเชเจนลูกของหอมุลเบหัวเตีย United Hmong Vision ชิตาซอลุลุฮอลือยาเตเดนูแล้วตมหายาโท UN ยาตาโทลอกูอยากเรียกว่าเดวานาการอยู่ในส่วนสุดจะมาชิมดีกว่า